Hey everyone. So today we are going to learn how to add front-end routing to our application. And we're going to use React Router DOM to do that, or the React Router library. So we're going to learn how to add routes. So when I go to a site, like maybe we want to go to the React Bootstrap docs, and let's just go there. So as I click around and go to different parts of the site, right? The URL bar changes here from navbar to accordion. And some of these are all these are actually different pages. And if I click here, I can navigate as well. And this is what we don't have set up in React and in our front-end applications yet, and what we're going to learn to do today. So that we can create pages that are associated with routes, right? With different URLs for our application. And we're going to see that doing that on the front end with React is done a slightly different way and has a couple different extra steps. So we're going to be talking about that a bit, diving into React Router DOM, which is the NPM package we're going to use to do that. And we're going to see how to set it up and make pages and make links and add all the kind of nice features we would like for a website the React way. I'm also going to do a little bit of general React review as we go, just to help us refresh ourselves on some of this stuff. So let's go ahead and kick it off by making a new React project. And no, I don't want to update my shell right now. And let's just remove that router demo code that we had there, and we'll make it again. So I've made a new directory, and can someone just maybe quickly remind me, how do I spin up a new React project with Vite?
npm create Vite.
Awesome. And Nathan, I saw you had your hand up as well.
Yeah, npm create
Sorry.
Vite. No, you're good.
Awesome. No,
Well,
I know.
doesn't the npm create Vite like make its own directory like already? So aren't you gonna have a directory inside of a directory?
That's a great question. Let's go ahead and run npm create Vite like this and see what it does. So it prompts me for a project name. And now I choose React and JavaScript, the things that we're all used to. And indeed, doing it that way, it did create a directory inside of the directory. It created a directory, the name of my project. How could I, inside the directory I've already created, create a new React project with Vite without creating that extra directory?
I think you add a period to the end of the
Yep.
npm create Vite.
Yeah, exactly. If we add the dot at the end, that tells Vite, hey, I don't want you to make another directory, just build it inside here. And both ways do the exact same thing. I'm a little more used to just making the directory name and then running the npm create Vite command with the dot, but either way works perfectly fine. And so now it's prompting me to run npm install. And can someone maybe remind me what happens? What does npm install do? What happens when I run this command? Andrew, yes, sir.
I believe it installs all of the dependencies that you need for your project.
Yeah, exactly. And how does npm install know what those dependencies are?
I believe it goes to the JSON file and then creates the lock.json with all of the programming in it, or all of the dependencies in it.
Yeah, exactly. npm install will look in package.json, and it will look at both dependencies and dev dependencies. There's a way to ignore dev dependencies that we don't want to do. That's for when we're building our production bundle later. But we don't need to worry about that right now. And just like you were saying, npm install looks at the different names of these npm packages, And again, you could go to npmjs.org and look up each of these and then find the GitHub for each of these. And we've got the specific version for each one we want. Though there's a little fanciness going on here. And when I run npm install, it will indeed create the package lock.json file. And it will create one more thing, right? What's the other thing that gets created when I run npm install?
Nodes modules.
Yeah, exactly. And my apologies if that was a little bit of a too close to a trick question. If we don't have a node modules directory, one will be created, and that's where all of these different npm modules will be installed. And let's just go ahead and watch that happen now. And can someone remind me, like, what's the difference between the package.json file and package lock.json?
Lock you don't touch.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you, Nika. The package lock, we never want to touch. That is always generated by npm. And then that's one of the biggest ones, and in a lot of ways, the most important thing. What are some other differences between package JSON and package lock.json? Like, I see a lot more in package lock.json than I do in my package JSON dependencies. Why is that? Tom, yes, sir.
Because your package JSON just lists like your overarching dependencies in their versions, and then the package lock will have all of those dependencies, and so forth, and all of their versions as well. So when you run npm install, it's going to look for the overarching dependencies, and then npm is going to pull down the child dependencies that those overarching ones need.
Yeah, exactly. These are the dependencies that my project needs. And in fact, if we go into this node modules directory and let's find React, or let's find React DOM. So if you look inside any of these node modules directories, what you'll see is a package JSON file. And the way that most npm packages are is they all have their own package JSON file. And if we look in here, I see that this React router npm package depends on, or npm module depends on some other npm modules, like whatever the heck loose, nvia, ify, and scheduler are. And that there's a peer dependency on React. And so I don't, want the dependencies of my dependencies in my package.json, but I do want like one single file that lists everything that all my dependencies need to run correctly. And if we look in here for scheduler, undoubtedly we'll find it lurking somewhere around here. We can see it lists that dependency there. And if I keep hitting enter, we'll eventually get to the scheduler one itself. And here is, in fact, the scheduler node module, so that package lock JSON has the specific version. And in fact, it kind of gives us a hash so that we can make sure that every time we run npm install, as best we can, we get the exact same thing. Awesome. And now I want to spin up my React project with npm run dev. And can someone remind me, what is this command doing? Not a trick question. Jordan, Edge, yes, sir.
npm run dev launches your server so that you can actually access your site at the local host and whatever the port number is that it gets assigned.
Yeah, awesome, exactly. And it tells us here, it assigns it a port number 5173 by default. If 5173 was taken up by something else, it would be somewhere else. And if I go here now, I can see my React app loading. And in fact, if I look at the network tab and I refresh the page, I can see the browser is requesting all these things from the Vite dev server, right? This little web server application that runs when we run npm run dev. And when I run npm run dev, how does npm know what the heck that dev command is? Like, why does npm run dev work, but if I do npm run foobar, I
Oh,
get
it's
a
in your
message missing script foobar?
it's in your scripts. In the is it v.config?
Yeah. Not v.config, but in package.json,
There it
where we
is.
have this scripts object. Though I might have misunderstood if you were talking about the vconfig maybe doing some other stuff. But for running an npm script, which is pretty much anytime we're doing like npm run or like dev test and start, we don't have to type run as a shorthand. But remember, if I change dev to foobar and do npm run foobar, it runs this command vite, which runs our vite dev server, and that works just fine. And I just want to pause and check in and see if folks have any questions as we're sort of reviewing our React project structure. Okay, awesome. And I've got all this stuff here, and can someone, and I kind of want to get rid of all of it just to like have a nice clean slate. And can someone just remind me where to go to get rid of all this stuff? Brett, yes, sir.
Yeah, you're gonna want to hit the SRC drop down, your source drop down, and
Yep.
then go to your app CSS, I think.
Yep.
Yeah, and then just get rid of all of it.
Okay,
And
awesome.
then you're gonna go to your index CSS and
Yep.
get rid of all that too.
Awesome.
Okay.
And then, oh yeah,
the
please
app-
continue.
The App.jsx. And I mean, you can get rid of all of it, or I think you could just get rid of the import React logo and the Vite logo.
Yeah, we don't need to import
lines
those
2 and 3.
things.
And you can also clear out everything below the div.
Yeah, totally. In fact, I'm just going to delete this whole return statement and let's just make a new one. And we'll give it, why do I need to add this fragment again? Why can't I just do like, and you know, like a paragraph tag? What's the problem with doing this?
I don't know, to be honest. I think it has something to do with needing to contain your like header one, like it can't just kind of be out there in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, exactly. And actually the error message probably says it best. It's a little wordy, but adjacent, this is just the way that React works, is adjacent JSX elements, right? This stuff gets rendered into HTML, but technically speaking, it's JSX because it's living inside our .jsx and our JavaScript, our file and our JavaScript code. Adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. So I can go ahead and wrap these in a div, and that will work just fine. And this makes sense if you think about an HTML document. Everything in the HTML is wrapped inside of one tag, right? The HTML tag. And so with React, it works the same way. The fragment just, I don't know if React is not adding a div under the surface, so it avoids the extra div, but it just tells React to sort of simulate wrapping it in a div, so we get the same thing without an extra div that gets rendered to the DOM. And Albert and Yams, I believe both of you had your hands up as well.
I was just gonna say the answer.
Yes.
Oh, awesome. Well, Albert, while I've got you, do we need this component state here for any reason?
No, unless we need to use use state later, we can set one up.
Yeah, exactly. So we can get rid of this too. And we're good to go. And thank you, Brett, and thank you, Albert. And now we have, I think, a pretty nice clean setup. I've got hello, I've got world. We got rid of everything in index.css and app.css. And can someone remind me what's the difference between index.css and app.css? Well, let me ask this. I know that here, I see here where app.css gets imported into App.jsx. And so I know that's how my React app knows to find that CSS in there. How does my React app know to find the CSS that we would put in index.css? Why is it that if in index CSS I do h1 color red, that works, right? Where am I importing
Yeah, is it on your main?
index.css?
Is it on your main JSX where you're mounting your app JSX?
Yeah, exactly. We're importing the index CSS over here in main. And so the difference, and thank you. And so the difference being like with Bootstrap, say, where maybe there are some Bootstrap classes that need to exist that we are going to use right away in app.jsx in our main app component, or maybe that like our other CSS is using, then we would put it in index.css. But generally speaking, we avoid putting CSS in here and we would put it in app.css, or as many of you have been, you know, creating maybe a separate CSS file for each component if you want to do it that way. I'm going to go ahead and undo this so this is gone. And as long as we're doing this review, let's just close the loop. And can someone remind me what the heck is line 6 here doing, where it talks about create root and we're doing document.get element by ID and render? What is this doing here and why do we need it? Like, can I go ahead? What if I change document.get element by ID to foobar? Yams, yes, sir.
So that root was referring back to an ID on our index.html so that it knew where to actually append to start rendering our JavaScript. And
Yeah.
render is just telling us, hey, let's render these HTML pseudo elements.
Yeah, exactly. So if we break this down, we see that we've imported this React DOM npm package, and it gets installed along with React, but it's specifically for working with the DOM. You can actually, there's something called React Native where you can use React to build native iOS or Android apps. So this is the library that lets React talk to the DOM. And we can see here, there's this function create root that we're calling. And actually the description here is pretty nice. It creates a root to display React components inside a browser DOM node, right? So we have to pick some tag, usually a div, always a div really, that React is going to hook into. And when all that React.js JavaScript runs to do like document, create element, whatever it's doing under the hood to actually create DOM nodes to render stuff to the browser, it hooks into this root node, this root DOM node, and renders it there. And remember here in index.html, we have the script tag. First, we create the div that has the ID, and then we load main.jsx, which bootstraps and loads our whole React application. So let's say I do want to, for this to be foobar, what do I have to change here in index.html for my React app to render now? Brian, yes, sir.
On line 10, change root to foobar in the ID.
Yeah. Exactly. Right? Create root is a function. It takes an argument, and we need to pass it the element that we're going to mount. And mount is the React term for the first time you create and render a component. Right? When a component re-renders, it's not remounting, it's re-rendering. Components only get rendered once unless they're totally removed, like when you refresh the page. And then we call this, and this returns something. If we hover over here, it'll tell us, and it looks like it returns some React DOM.root component. But it gives us something that has this method render. And this is sort of like the return statement in our React components that we've seen, right? Where we write return, and then inside there we have this stuff we want to render. And Brian, what is React strict mode doing here?
If
And
I
this
remember right, it
Yeah.
is gonna render the page twice every time there's a re-render, to make sure that there's no like dependency issues, or I'm that's where I'm lost. I'm not sure beyond that.
Yeah, that is exactly what it does. It causes the page to render twice, and we can see it here where I see my app printed out twice in the console log. And the reason it does this is because sometimes like re-rendering a component is where certain tricky problems are. So for developing, it can help find those issues. But a lot of the times this is kind of a pain and confusing, and it's perfectly okay to remove this. And it does make it a little easier to read console log statements. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that as well. I'm going to go ahead and change foobar back to root. And I'm going to go ahead here and change this back to root as well. And Brian and Yams, thank you very much. So this was an awesome review of just of what's going on with React, and we kind of like walked through the whole flow, right? The browser requests index.html from the Vite dev server. It goes through this and it loads all the assets. It still loads this SVG even though we're not using it, which is fine. Meta we learned about the other day. This is, by the way, where it says Vite.react up here. I can change my title. And then in the body, we have to, by the way, oh, that still works. I actually would have expected that not to work, but that's okay. We create the div, and then we load main.jsx, and main.jsx imports React, calls create root to hook on to this div. And if we look in here, we can see it. Here's our div with the ID. And then React under the hood makes all those, document.create element calls to, based on the components we make, actually render stuff to the DOM and build our application. So I just want to pause and check in and see if folks have kind of any questions on this review before we keep on rolling. Awesome. So we've seen how to build stuff and how to write stuff and how to render stuff, but we don't have routing, right? And a route often is just a synonym for a URL. You'll often hear like the main part of a URL referred to as the base route. For instance, note here like react-bootstrap.netlify.app. This part of the URL doesn't change as I navigate around to different pages. So this is called like the base route or the base URL. And then these are referred to as different routes or paths. And you saw a little bit in the full stack week of how to set up different routes to receive API requests. Now let's see how to create some front-end routing. And there's a couple different libraries out there to do this, but the most popular by far is one called React Router. And I will say right now, just to give a bit of a heads up, React Router is a little funky, though it's gotten so much better over the years. But it is probably the most popular front-end routing tool. And what we're going to be doing is what's called front-end routing or client-side routing. And there's actually a very nice description of it here on the React Router page. On a traditional website, the browser requests a document. It sends an HTTP GET request to a server. And then the server sends back HTML and CSS and JavaScript assets. And so for those of you that did the full stack culminating exercise, remember all those different HTML files under the pages directory? That's like the classic traditional way of different page, different HTML doc, and then you have a route for each one, and the backend server figures out when I see, you know, slash homepage or slash about, I need to send back this HTML page or that HTML page. Client-side routing or front-end routing that we're doing with React is a little different. Our React app will actually change the URL. We will not do a page request or make a request to the server. This can enable faster user experiences and more dynamic user experiences. And it's called a single page app. And so that's what we're going to be building today. So there's a bunch of different ways to set up React Router. We'll see a bit more about some of these. We might dig into these a bit more later on. They're for all sorts of different situations. By far, the most kind of popular one and the one to start with is we're going to use this command create browser router with React Router. But first, we got to go ahead and install it. So let's go ahead and do that. And as always, I just want to do a quick check and look at the docs to see if there's anything special that I have to do with installation. And it doesn't look like it. There's all this other stuff that's being installed here that honestly, we don't really need to worry about right now. Landon, yes, sir.
Yeah, I was just, I'm guessing React Router DOM, that other package is just maybe built on top of React Router? Or
Yeah, that's
okay.
that's exactly it. This is the name of the React Router package. That's a great question. That is a little confusing because this says reactrouter.com. I'm not sure if they have something different for like React Router if you're trying to use React Native, but React Router DOM is what we're going to install, and I'll end up probably like using both of those terms, but they mean the same thing here, and it's one npm package.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So let's go ahead and install this sucker. I'm going to go ahead and install it. And while I'm doing this, let me go ahead and close some of these out that we don't need at the moment. And if I go to package.json, I can see that it's been added here to my dependencies list. And it seems to have been installed, and we should be ready to go. And I'm going to run my dev server again. And I'm going to change my script back to dev. The one thing I do want to point out about React Router, it's like in very big letters on their homepage is what's new in version 6.4. And then there's this I'm on version 5. The change from version 5 to version 6 of React Router was pretty big. We should be using version 6 for everything in this class. We can see here that this was installed. So just keep that in mind, like as you're finding tutorials and resources online, that we're working with version 6 of React Router. So let's go ahead and start doing some setup and putting this thing into action. Right, we've covered a little bit about what is React Router DOM, why we want to use it. Let's start getting it set up. So we've made a components directory before, and we'll make a components directory too. What we also are going to do is we're going to make a directory named pages. And that is a file and not a directory. I do apologize. Let's try that one more time. Let me go ahead and just delete this. And we're going to make it inside the source directory because we're going to put React components there. And as you can probably guess, what we're going to do is for each page, we'll make one component. So let me go ahead and make a component here, and we'll just call it homepage.jsx, and it's going to be super simple. And I'm going to write this component as an arrow function instead of a function definition, just because that's a pretty common way to write React components as well. There's not a huge difference. I'm honestly not sure which way is the recommended way these days. It might be the arrow function. It's kind of switched back and forth over time. And we'll add just a homepage message here. And let's I actually just want to make sure that my code works, and I want to render my homepage here in my app component before going on to the routing. Can someone maybe remind me how to go about doing that? So I've got my homepage component. How do I render it
You need
in my
to
app component?
export it.
Yeah, exactly. Something like this.
Yes, or export default homepage.
Yeah, exactly. And then how would I go about importing it where I want to use it here in App.jsx?
Import homepage from the file location. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, and I get the nice autocomplete from VS Code. And if I put the component here in the return statement with the stuff that app component renders, we should see it show up. And let's see here. I just needed to do a refresh because I think I'd killed and restarted the server. Awesome. And just to remind me and to refresh my understanding, like I've seen, imports that look like this. If I want it, what's the difference between the two ways of importing like this versus this?
Is it if you have like different functions that you need to import rather than just one default?
Yeah, exactly. I could export homepage, and I think, let's see, a couple things are breaking here. So let's just put that there. The syntax gets slightly different. Let's say I wrote a function foobar, and I wanted to export that. And I think it probably wants me to just put the export statement right there. And in fact, I'm just going to do this the way that I'm most familiar with, which is as an arrow function. And let's see what this little squiggly is complaining about. That's just complaining about something else. So I might have a couple different exports here. And then, these are called named exports. And the reason is because I actually need to make sure then that when I'm importing each of one, I use the correct, the same name. With the default export, I could actually name it whatever I want, though you almost always want to have it be the same name as the function itself. And if I clear this and refresh this, I can see that we have this hello message from my foobar function. You can mix and match these as well. And I think it might be something like this. We can have both default and named exports. And this thing that's special about the default export is I can actually give it whatever name I want, because since we use this special default keyword, JavaScript knows how to find the default export. With the named exports, there is an object of each of these things that it's destructuring, and we need to use the specific name. But again, for components, when writing a component, the convention of one component per file and making that component the default export is the way to go. And I think I just need to get rid of the non-existent foobar function, and we're good to go. And I just want to check in to see if folks have any questions. Okay, awesome. So I've got homepage here. And in fact, you know, we don't have any sort of routing at all. I can put in foobar, I can put in nonsense, and our app doesn't care. Right? And the goal that we want is that right here for the base route, I see homepage, and eventually that we get an about page. And we see different things based on the URL. So let's go ahead and actually use React Router DOM and start setting this up. So the way to do this is we want to create a file in the source directory named, router.jsx. And this is going to be our main hub for React Router. And we're going to have to, and let me shrink this a bit so we have a little more room as we write code. We're going to have to import a function named create browser router from React Router DOM. And what's going to happen is we are going to call this function, and it's going to create our router. It's an object that will then get turned into a component, as we'll see. And then what we pass as arguments to the create browser router function is an array of objects. And each of the objects here, each object represents a route. So let's see what this looks like.
Hey Adam, you put create BrowserRouter. You're missing an S on browser.
Oh, thank you so much. Let's go ahead and change that right now. Good eye, thank you. And VS Code tried to get way too smart there. So whenever I'm creating a route with React Router, each object is a route, and we need a path or the route, the URL. And I need to tell React Router what the main component for the whole app is for App.jsx. So even our app component needs a route, and that is going to be the base route for the whole application. So this is the route. And when the URL in the browser matches this, we now can tell React Router DOM what React element or component it's going to render. And I need to go ahead and import app. And so this is a good start. I'm going to need to export the router. So let's just go ahead and do this now before I forget, because we're going to use it later. So we've told React Router, here's a route. It is the base route and render the app component. But off of this, because remember, my goal is localhost/about, localhost/contact. So I want some child routes off of this base route or off of this base path. And so with React Router DOM, the object can have a property named children that is also an array. And I need to add a comma. That's what that red squiggly is telling me there. And inside here, we put more of the same kinds of router objects. So I know that I want to render my home page. So that's going to be the element. But because I want the home page to be the first thing that we see when we go to the site, even on the base route, right? Because that's what a home page is. It's the first thing that you see. I can use this special attribute that's a Boolean called index to say that this is the index. This is the first thing that you see. And so now I've set up some routing where my app component is the base route. We only have one child route right now, but it's the index. It's the first one that should show up, and it will then render the home page. And so we've created this router object. And I just want to pause and check in to see what questions folks might have. And I see something in Whiskey questions, but I don't. Oh, Michael. Yeah, that I see there's a couple of responses there. I think that's a separate issue around some. I'm not sure what was happening with npm installer, but that looks like something else. Please remind me if we need to come back to that one later. Oh, Brian, yes, sir.
Sorry, I think Natalie might have been first. Go ahead, Natalie.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So even though you put the path with the dash for the element app, is that going to be the same path for the home page because we put index true now?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I think once we hook this up and see it in action, it will help illustrate this, and then we'll add like another child with a different path, and we can see what that looks like. Brian, yes, sir.
Adam, is this create browser router coding pattern, with an array of objects with these properties? Is this new to version 6, or is this older and consistent with what they had in version 5? Do you know?
Some version of this they were using in version 5. I don't know off the top of my head if something changed in version 6 or not. I will say the pattern of using objects as these sort of like complex configuration objects is really common in JavaScript. And the pattern in React of the same way we can pass a function as an argument without calling it, we can pass a component or assign a component to a variable without rendering it, right? We're not rendering the app component on line 10. We're not rendering the homepage component on line 14. We're assigning them to these values, and somewhere along the line, they end up in a return statement inside a component, and then they get rendered. But React Router DOM is going to go ahead and do that for us. So I've created my router. The question now is, where can I use it? And I want, I know this needs to be in the main part of my app because it's the router for everything. But I can't put it in App.jsx because I import the app right here on line 10. And if I put it in App.jsx, I'll get a circular import because this imports from app and app imports this, and that will throw an error. So where else might I be able to put the router so that it's in the main part of my app?
Main.jsx.
Yeah, main.jsx, and I think someone else was saying something as well. Main.jsx, right? It's really got to be main.jsx or possibly index.html, right? Index.html loads the basic HTML that launches the React app. But the React app hasn't started yet. Main.jsx is really where we bootstrap the whole thing. And this is where we are going to use our router. So first off, I'm going to go ahead and import it. And let me make sure I get this right. And in fact, I don't need source because we're already in the source directory. My brain just keeps wanting to do that. I just need /router. And I can't just go ahead and render this. This isn't actually a React component. It's a complex JavaScript object. But React Router DOM luckily gives us a component that we can use to render it. And it's called router provider. And you'll see this term provider show up in other parts of React and other libraries as well, because it's this component's job to provide us the router. And so now, because I want to use the router for everything, we're not going to mount app. We're going to mount router provider. Now, the router provider component takes a prop named router. And 3 guesses what's going in that prop. What do we think? Not a trick question. Oh, and I see it in the chat. Natalie, thank you so much. Our router that we created, exactly. And let me go ahead and just put it in there and close the component. And let's see what's going on here. And actually, look at this. My app re-rendered, and we have an unexpected application error message that I very clearly did not put in my code. And the URL here is /contact. Anyone want to guess what caused this message and what can I change so I can just see like my homepage? And maybe the better question is, I want to see the homepage and not this error. What do I need to change so that I can see like my App.jsx message, and maybe if we're lucky, the homepage? I just want to see App.jsx. Awesome, and I see a couple comments in the chat. I've been hacked. If only. Adrian, you were saying / is in the base route, and you're on the right path. And DJ, you were saying you're referencing /contact and not the base route. And that's exactly it. Our React router is now up and running. And so before I could put anything in here and the Vite dev server was ignoring it. Now it's actually our React JavaScript application that's paying attention to what's in the URL bar. And if we go look at router, there is no path for contact. And so React router has a default error message, 404 not found, when there's a route in the URL bar that doesn't exist. So if instead I just put in my base route, I go to my homepage and I'm seeing app, and I'm seeing App.jsx, and I'm seeing the homepage component rendered, which is awesome. So we have made some really good progress here, right? We're using the router provider. In fact, I don't need to import app anymore here. However, I'm also rendering the homepage component on app. And while it's great that it's showing up, and it's great that I now have routing, that React Router is paying attention to what I put in the URL bar. What I want to have happen is I don't want to render the homepage component here. I want React Router to do it for me when I'm at my base route, right? Because for the base route, we render app. We also render the homepage because that's the child that we want to show here for the index, which is used synonymously as like base route or path. So let's get rid of homepage here and see what happens. So we're not quite there yet. We're almost there, right? We've got routing working, but we haven't hooked up the child route to its parent route to render. So although my router is rendering the app component, app is not rendering homepage. But I wanted to because I've specified app as the index element. So what are we missing? And this is the next step in our React Router journey, as this is something new. And what we're missing is something called an outlet. We've created the link between our router and main.jsx. Right? In main.jsx, we are rendering the router provider that is applying the router that we created. And so we have routing functionality, but we haven't created the link yet between the app component and the children of app. We need to have the children have some sort of connection so app can render them. And we need to help out React Router so it knows how to do that. And that's what this special component that comes from React Router DOM called outlet is for. And that's what we're going to use to make this stuff render. And so I'm importing outlet from React Router DOM, and it's a component. And I'm going to go ahead and put it right there. And now we have our homepage. And so what outlet does is you could think of it almost as like a placeholder component because it's getting rendered here in App.jsx, right? It's in our return statement. But React Router DOM figures out what goes inside here to actually get rendered based on what we have. Excuse me. Let's move the router over here. What we have in our routing, because we've got our home page and it's set to the index. So let me go ahead and add one other page so we can have a different path and we can see this in action, and then we can review and discuss this. And then I think that's a good time to pause and we have a sort of morning workshop assignment for you all to work on for a bit. And then in the second half of our lecture later on, we'll dig a bit deeper into more stuff that we can do with React Router. But let's start by creating an about page. And I could use some help with this. I want to, we'll put router way off to the side. I want to create an about page. So what's the first thing I need to do? The same way that we went ahead and created homepage. What's my step one here?
Go to your pages.
Yeah, go to pages. And I was gonna say, I think let's do the hand raising because I know otherwise there will be we'll all end up speaking at once. So I want to go to pages and I want to create an about page component. And I'm going to follow the same pattern that I did in creating the homepage. And all we're going to do is have it have about, and I'll add a paragraph tag just for fun, just so there's something there. See, and I need to export it as a default export. And I'm going to run the format document command so it looks nice. Awesome. So I've got an about page. I've created the component. What's my next step? So it's part of the router and it will render when we go to, localhost 5173/about. Brian, yes, sir. And I apologize, my calling on people is going to be ad hoc and very much just about which hand I see first.
Sir, do you have to add it as a child in your router.jsx?
Yeah, exactly. Let's go to router.jsx. And where do you think we should add it as a child?
How about create a new object? So comma after the first object in children, and then do a new object in children.
Yeah, exactly. Let's put another route object here. And what do I want for element?
That would be the, you would have to import it, but that would be the about page.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm going to let VS Code do the importing for me. And so do I want index true here as well?
No, you actually want to specify like an endpoint, I'm guessing.
Yeah. I haven't shown this explicitly, but the answer is hiding in the code that we're looking at. Any guesses as to how I do that here?
Would that be path?
Yeah, exactly. And that was, I realized that was right on the border of a bridge too far question. But the same way that we use the path property up here, we can use it here as well. And we're going to have our path be about, and we do want to put a slash at the end of it because later on, maybe there's another route that's like about/team or something like that. So just by following the convention now of ending our paths with a slash, it will make our lives easier. And so it's a little funny, but this is like one big route object. And this has our main component app that builds the whole thing. And then this children array also has these route objects inside of it. So to take us home, Brian, how can I test if this is working or not now?
Why don't you, in the URL bar at the very top, add a slash about slash?
Yeah, thankfully it's not super strict about the trailing slash. And lo and behold, we have about. And Brian, awesome job and thank you, sir. And so now I have front end routing, right? I have my home page, I have my about page, React router is doing the work. And let me go back to app. This outlet component, React router figures out what child to render here based on the URL bar. Edge, yes, sir.
So when we're doing this, it's still going to render the hello in the world from the app.jsx. So would the standard convention be you would have like a nav bar on your app page that has links to all your other outlets, and that would be how you would navigate? That way you don't have to recreate a nav bar on every page.
Great question. Yeah, that is very common convention where maybe we want, a div, and let's say pretend this is a full width nav bar, right? Maybe we don't even want the title. And then that way I only have to use my nav bar component once and all the children are inside here. To take that even further, I'm not going to try and put it in the code because I think it would be a little funny, but let me grab the annotation tool real quick. And we've got red. So you've got a nav bar. If we had a sidebar, we could put that component in app as well, right? Because these are things that we would always want. So here we would say like child component renders. And this stuff up here is from App.jsx. Now we would need, some CSS and Flexbox, however we would want to do it to lay it out correctly. But there's a number of things that exactly, and like maybe we want, there's always a footer, And that could go in App.jsx as well. So I'm going to get rid of my, well, actually, I realize this is a terrible drawing and I'll get rid of it in a moment, but does that sort of answer your question?
Yes, it does, Adam. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, great question. What other questions do folks have? And let me catch up on the chat. So I see a question here in our Whiskey chat channel. In the render function in main.jsx, does a React project still render what's on App.jsx even though we took App.jsx out because we're importing it in the router and that's now what we're referencing? Exactly. Yeah, great question, Natalie, and you hit the nail on the head. And in fact, let's walk through the full flow of our React application, which means we have to start with my favorite place, which is the network tab. So the very first time that our React app loads, there's an HTTP GET request to localhost 5173 from the browser. And our Vite dev server is running on that port 5173, and it's listening, and localhost just means their own machine. So the Vite dev server sends back index.html. And the browser reads through index.html. Vite dev server has injected a whole bunch of stuff here, some of which is what makes hot module reloading work, some of which is front-end build stuff not going into. But the important bit is down here, we get to this script tag that is importing this file main.jsx that Vite will turn into normal looking JavaScript. But we can see right here, in fact, the browser sends another HTTP GET request to the Vite dev server without worrying about this, which is, I think, Vite just telling the browser like where it is. I don't know what the T equals stuff, but we can in fact see our JavaScript code here. And there's a bunch of stuff we don't have to really worry about. But here we can see our React DOM, create root, blah, 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 blah. And as soon as the browser gets that JavaScript, it runs it. And that's when our React app starts up. So React starts up. The first thing that it does is it finds the div with the ID root, and it creates the React root element and calls this render function that then renders a component. And before this was our app component, but now because we need to bake the routing into our whole React app, we render the router provider component. And what we pass into there is the router that we created. And just like you were saying, Natalie, in here, we specify for our base URL. And remember, all of these other paths, because they're children of that, are off of this base URL, right? These are all child routes or paths. Contact, which doesn't exist yet. It renders the app component. And so that's why then we get the app component rendered here. And in fact, if we go to React DevTools, we can see all of the sudden, there's a whole lot of components that got created by React Router. And now using React Router DevTools is a bit more complicated because there's all these things called providers to help pass data between different components. But we can see the router and we can see these different routes. And all the way down here, we see app, we see outlet, and that looks like something that we've seen before. And all this provider stuff. And we can go ahead and go to the about page and we can watch, instead of homepage, change to about page. So app renders. And then when we go to App.jsx and it's doing its rendering, it renders this special outlet component that React Router gives us. And we don't need to import that anymore. And this says, hey, React Router, look at the URL bar, figure out where we are and what child route of app we should render. And the index is the default one. So that's the one that gets rendered. And then if we change the URL to have about, the outlet renders the about page. And all of this is happening in the browser, in the JavaScript. We're seeing some page refreshes now because I have to hit enter when I change the URL bar. But after sort of the afternoon work session, we'll see how to add links so that our front end routing is happening without talking to the server at all. What other questions do folks have? And I see one here in Whiskey Chat, so let me tackle that one first. Landon, I see you're saying, what's the industry standard for using React Router DOM? I can't look, I don't want to dig too much into code that we're not looking at right now. And I honestly don't know off the top of my head. Again, there was a pretty big change between React Router version 5 and version 6. There's also a lot of different ways to configure and use React Router. So there's not necessarily going to be one industry standard. So I think that's the best answer to your question.
Thank you.
Yeah, totally. And as always, you know, like if we look at the getting started tutorial here, it kind of follows this pattern that we're seeing. I think what you shared is a bit more advanced with the route component, but I'm not sure. And at the end of the day, there's a lot of different ways to do this stuff. That's a good question though, and good stuff to be thinking about. What other questions do folks have? Okay, I know we're a little past the hour, so I think this is a good time for a break and also for a workshop assignment. So how do you all feel about taking a break and then having some time to write some React code yourself that has some routing? Cool. Let me go ahead and talk through the workshop assignment and then we'll break. So I know you all have been wanting to do a project that we'll build, and we're finally getting to it today and tomorrow, and then a little bit on Friday. We're going to be building a Rick and Morty React app. We're not going to be using it today, but actually later today in the assignments, we probably will be getting to it, but there is a Rick and Morty API that very much like the Pokemon API you can use to get like different character information and stuff like that. So that's where we are going to end up, is building a React app with different pages that gets data from the Rick and Morty API and displays it in nice ways using everything we've learned with Flexbox and CSS and Bootstrap or Tailwind and routing. So for this morning, for the next hour, until 11 o'clock Central, your task is, and let me make this just a touch bigger. To kick this off, create a new React project. It should have a home page. It should have App.jsx. You should have a router with React Router. It should be hooked up. And I'm not sure what that URL is for. We just should have the home page render a message encouraging people to watch the show. I think this might be a placeholder URL. I'll check with Francisco. Let's just have the homepage render a message saying to watch the show. Yeah, and this might be just a placeholder for localhost to indicate that this is all running on vdev server localhost. If you want to go nuts, because we saw how to add more than one page and route, you could make another page, whether it is about page or whatever you want it to be, just to play around with stuff. But so that's your task for the next hour. So it's very similar to what we just did here, just Rick and Morty themed. You don't have to make any API calls with Rick and Morty yet. We're not there. And then what we will look at after our break is we've created pages, we've connected BrowserRouter, right? We've installed React Router DOM and seen how to use create BrowserRouter to create our browser. We've connected pages to paths, and after the break, we'll see how to create our own custom air page rather than the default one, and how to make links so you can click around to different pages on your site, but doing it the React Router way. Does that sound good? And do folks have any questions? Oh, awesome. And Francisco, thank you for the clarification. This is just meant to be Vite's like localhost. You should be able to spin up your React app and it should show, App.jsx and the homepage has to say like, hey, go watch Rick and Morty or something to that effect. Nathan, yes, sir.
Yeah, so I mean, a couple days ago we were talking about the assessment. It's gonna have like state props and use effects kind of on there. Is this React Router material gonna be on the assessment as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Now that we're seeing routing, this is what lets us level up our React apps to be more complex and be like real websites or web apps. Any other questions around the morning assignment or in general? Okay, awesome. Let me go ahead and stop the recording and then we can have some more time. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground. We've gone through what React Router is and the React Router DOM package, that's the NPM package name. We've seen how to install and configure it. And now in our main JSX, instead of rendering the app component, we render the router provider component. And we've seen how to create a router. And by the way, I'll share this link later, but while I have very mixed feelings about the React Router docs, I think they do a poor job in a lot of ways of documenting stuff. Like I really want just a nice API. They do have a nice page on the route object, which is the main thing that we use to build our routing. And they have a nice page on create BrowserRouter. So I will share both of those later. And those are worth looking at. There are some much more advanced things that React Router can do involving like HTTP requests. Like you can fire off an HTTP request and then wait for it. But that's all stuff that's a bit more advanced that we're not getting into right now and that you all don't need to worry about. Our next step, and Roger actually gave us a really nice preview of this with his demo, is we want some links, right? I've got a home page, I've got an about page. Let me go ahead and make another page. Let's make a contacts page just so we can have it. And to do that, I'm going to literally copy my about page. And in the pages directory, which is just convention, there's nothing special about the name, but it's a very useful way to organize your React code. The idea of having one component per page, and those live in a directory named pages. And then other components that maybe are used across multiple pages can live in a components directory. Is a very nice way of organizing it. And now that I've got this contacts page, I'm going to add a new route object as a child route on our app, on our base route. And the path is going to be contacts. And React Router will render the contacts page when we navigate there. And so now I can type into the URL bar about, and we see about. And remember, can someone remind me, actually, why am I still seeing pretend this is a full width nav bar on the about page? Because I don't have that in my about page. And if I look at my contacts page, I don't see that either. So why do I still see this message here? Chris, yes, sir.
Is it because it's on, or it's mounted on your app page, and your app page is basically bringing in like your children, which is like your home page, contact page, and other stuff?
Exactly. When the app component renders, it renders whatever's in the return statement. So that's this div here. And if I get rid of it, it'll go away. And then outlet, think of it as a placeholder for another component. And React Router figures out what that component should be based on our routing. And that's why here, if I go to the router, I can see, my different routes, and the about page renders. Outlet gets replaced with about page when I go to about. It gets replaced with contacts when I go to contact. And since these are all child routes off of our base route, React Router renders the app component, and then it renders the appropriate child. And so I just want to check in and see if folks have any questions or things that we want to review before moving forward. I think I'll go ahead and put that back. Okay. And so as Roger kind of gave us a preview for, the next step is what would really give us some nice functionality is where I don't have to type stuff in the URL bar. There can be links like any normal website that a user can have. So, and we saw a really nice preview of that from Roger's code, where let's make an unordered list and let's make a list item. And inside there, let's use an href tag, an a tag to make a link. And I'll put in here the full URL. And let's have this go to the about page. And I'm going to copy this. And I don't think I need the trailing slash, but I'll put it there just to be sure, to make sure that React Router correctly matches the paths. Let's add a contact page. And so now I've got about something went wrong with contact. Let's see what it is. I know that the problem is probably that this path doesn't match whatever I have in my router. And I probably made a typo because that is by far the most common kind of programmer error. And lo and behold, contact has an S. And to be honest, I'm not sure that it should, because I think it's meant to be like contact us, not like these are the contacts in my phone, but we'll let it stand. And now that's working. And let's go ahead and add a link to the homepage as well, just for completion's sake. So this is great. However, there's one issue here. If I go to the network tab, I see that every time I'm clicking on one of these links, the whole page is reloading. And that means, remember, when the page refreshes, whatever JavaScript program is running is killed. And so index.html reloads, our whole React app reloads. So, anything that's in React component state, all that stuff is gone. And then the whole React app remounts, right? Gets attached to the DOM and rendered for the first time again. And that's not really what I want, because I probably, the first time this loads, I might want to make an API call, say to the Rick and Morty API to get some data. And then maybe as I click on different pages to navigate there, we pass that data in like from component state as props. Or I have some other React component state that I don't want to go away. And also, if you notice, there's this flash on the page, and that's kind of ugly. And so it would just make for a better user experience all around. So in order to accomplish this, to do links with React Router, we don't want to use normal href tags, because while this works for now, as soon as we start adding in more stuff to our React app, like with component state and API calls with use effect, it will not behave the way we want it to. So we need to have links the React Router DOM way. And luckily, React Router provides us with a component named link. And let me go ahead and delete these over here. And let's use the link component and see what this looks like. So instead of the href attribute, our link component has a prop named to, and here we put in the path that we want to navigate to. So I think this one, because in fact, I'm forgetting, let's make this the home page. So to should point to just our base route. So that's all I need, because React Router knows that localhost port 5173 is the base route. All of our React Router routing is relative to this. And FYI, with props, if you're passing in a string value, you don't need the curly brackets, but it won't hurt to have them. So this and this are the same. If this was, a variable though, then we do need the curly brackets. So it's really personal preference, but just so you know, when you see that, what's going on there. So that's working, which is awesome. I'm just going to copy this code and I'm going to paste it in here. And now instead of home, we'll have our about page. And instead of about, we'll have our contacts page. And again, I recommend just making all of these lowercase strings for simplicity and sanity. I'm not actually sure if it will cause an issue, but that's what I'm used to. Directory names as well should be lowercase. Certain file names, like React component names, by convention, the file name is uppercase. But in general, for stuff like this, you want lowercase. And so now this React link component navigates for me. And let's observe what's going on. And let's refresh the page and do a fresh start. So our React app has loaded. It has mounted for the first time. It went to contacts because that's what I had in the URL bar. So let's in fact mount it from the home page. So let's clear the networks tab and note that when I click on these different links, there is no page refresh. The browser is making 0 HTTP GET requests. We're not talking to a server. We're not requesting an HTML file. We're not requesting CSS. All of this routing is happening 100% in the JavaScript code running in the browser. And it is now our React code that has taken control of the URL bar. And I kind of think of it as like one of those zombie parasites that like infects your brain and controls you or something. Because now our browser is a little Frankenstein. Like no one ever thought this was how browsers would be used and this is how the URL bar would work. But remember, in JavaScript, we can always do window location href to change the URL to whatever we want. We already had JavaScript to do this. But now React Router is doing this work for us to keep the URL bar and this in sync. And the great thing about this is when I want to, shoot my buddy a message and share the awesome homepage I made with them, I can share them the link to exactly the spot I want. And we see the about page rendered, right? Not the home page. And we didn't have that behavior before with our app. And so this is what's called a single page app, because only one single HTML page loads, but we get a whole app with front-end routing. And so this is also what's called front-end routing or client routing. So I just want to pause and check in and see what questions folks have. And let me
Is there a
catch up.
way?
Oh, go ahead.
Good. Is there a way to, like I know in normal CSS and HTML, you can like specify where at on the page you want something to be at, like vertically. Is there a way to do that here? Like whenever you have a scroll bar and you're actually making it a little bit more lengthier, is there a way to do that as well? To like have them appear at a certain point, like if you have headings or something in the file?
Yeah, there is. I think those are called anchor tags, where you see the sort of hash symbol. I am not 100% sure off the top of my head, to be honest, how to do that. Ed, yes, sir. I saw your hand shoot up there.
So using the outlet, similar to Michael's question, I guess I can picture instances where, like, within a page, we would want to have other sub pages that we would want to click links to. Is there a way to have like sub outlets?
Yeah, that's a
Does
great
that
question.
make sense?
Yeah, let me tackle these one at a time. That's a great question as well. So Michael, to answer your question, so the scroll behavior is maybe a little more complex. I'm not honestly sure off the top of my head. It looks like we might need to do some JavaScript here to get that scrolling to work. And I think we might need the JavaScript on normal sites. The other piece is what's called an anchor tag, where everything after the hashtag it stays on the same URL, but it's different parts of the page. Like if we go to Wikipedia and we look up cats, and let's scroll down, and here we I could have sworn these were anchor tags. Oh, there we go, behavior. So if we look here, this is what's called the anchor tag. So everything past the hashtag doesn't get sent to the server. It's actually what the browser uses to scroll to the right spot on the page. We might have to implement that behavior manually with a line or two of JavaScript to get it working with React Router. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but we would follow this pattern. So it is doable, yes. And then there was another really good question of basically, it sounded like you wanted to have like more routing, like children within children. Did I get that right?
Sorry, can you say that again? I was distracted.
It sounded like you wanted to have sort of children within children, like more
Yeah.
routing, like in
Yep,
context
that's
here, you
exactly
want to have
right.
more stuff. Yeah,
Mhm.
totally. So there's nothing stopping us from in React Router adding more children here, just like we did there, and adding more and more components. At this point, like let's do this just for the sake of learning and see what happens. Let's call this child contacts, just so we have a name. And I'm actually not 100% sure if this will work. Let's find out. Let's do just an H2 child contact page. And it would help if I had the equal sign so that, oh no, that's right. And I'm adding a page at the end here because child contacts. Context is something completely different that we will learn about tomorrow. And let's throw this in the router and see what happens. So we need a path. And maybe this path is going to be, let's have this be the index of this one. And let's have the element be Now contacts. And now let's go to our contacts page and let's add an outlet. And I'm actually not 100% sure what will happen, but it will be interesting to find out. So I don't, let's see, it looks like I have a typo. I'm missing a comma right here. So let's fix that. Reference error index is not defined, and it would sure help if I had index true. So we have the child contacts page. Now let's try adding the outlet here and see if React Router complains or not. So I'm not sure that it works quite like this. You know, we could poke around with this and do like path.
You put the outlet on the child context, wouldn't it go on the actual context page? Is that the
Oh,
the
thank
error
you
that
so
we're getting
much.
there?
It sure would. That would help. And I think we said context / child. Ah,
Cool.
actually, it is.
Yeah, sweet.
So there we go.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you, Adam.
Great question. So we can kind of nest this infinitely, and React Router will figure out like for which outlet what should go where. I do recommend being cautious in how much nesting that you do. It will very quickly start to become complicated. And in some ways, like if you are doing stuff inside a page, you might want to think about if you really need React Router to do it. The other way to do this is instead of nesting it here inside contact, well, it depends on the goal, I guess. Because you can do this with React without using the router. We just wouldn't get the change in the URL bar. We could do this, we could move this a level up, right? It could like be here. And we would just change this to be contacts / child, though now we might have to duplicate some code in the other ones. So there's a couple different ways to do this. This does work quite nicely. I do recommend being careful and having too much nesting because it will very quickly become more complicated than you think. I see DJ saying an old rule of thumb was not to nest deeper than 3 pages. I would agree with that. I would encourage you all not to even nest like 2 levels deep like this, unless you really, really need to. Most of the time, I don't think you should, because you can also use conditional rendering the normal way with React and some component state. I saw another hand up as well. But I think maybe that question was answered. And then there was a couple questions and whiskey questions that I want to make sure to get to. So great question for those of us who haven't watched Rick and Morty. What's the elevator pitch? I will let other people in the class respond with what the elevator pitch is. I am a fan of the show. It does have a distinctive character to it. But that is a great question. I see another question for Crystal from Crystal. Is it necessary to import React from React in main.jsx? I don't think it is. That's a great question. If we go to main, I don't think we actually need this here, right? We actually have the red squiggly saying React is defined but never used. I think React DOM imports everything that we need. We might need to import. I think React DOM imports React. We'll find out if this breaks or not. I don't remember off the top of my head. But there we go. So I don't think we need it. No. Great question. And yeah, with Rick and Morty, if anyone wants to make their 30-second, like if I'm standing next to someone in an elevator pitch as to what the show is, feel free to throw it in our Risky channel in response to the question. I'll leave the pitch to others to make. Let's keep on rolling with React Router because we have some good stuff. Right, this gets us awfully far. And as we saw, we in fact can do, and in fact, let's just go to our router. And for our child routing, as long as we're doing this, let's build this, let's change this to index so that it always shows up so that we can see it a little more easily. And now we see it right here on the contacts page, that second outlet rendering. So this is great. We've got React Router working the React Router way. We've got linking going on. And this lets us build pretty powerful applications. Let's talk a little bit about error handling. Oh, there is actually one thing I want to point out about the link component that's really important. If I go in here, and I know it's a little hard to see because this is on a, let's see if we can bump up the font size. There we go. If I look at this, and I look at the elements, how does that link component get rendered to the DOM? As a normal href. And this is a borderline, not a trick question, but a bit more of a challenging one. Does anyone have any thoughts as to why it might be important to know that the link component gets rendered to the DOM as an href? So what if I want to write a Cypress test to navigate to a page and then confirm that something is there? We saw yesterday that we can use all of the normal selector tools. So I could write a cypress.get command to get the first child in my unordered list and look inside it for an A tag. And I could use the click command to click on that link. And then that would drive us to the next page. So for things like Cypress and testing, they can interact with these links just like normal A tags. And so that's why it's valuable to know that the link component renders just as an href to the DOM. And I just want to check in to see if folks have any questions around that. Cool. Awesome. So let's add a little error handling because it'd be nice if when I type this in to something that doesn't exist, instead of this message, 404 not found, hey developer, we have our own custom one. And in fact, React Router is telling us that we can do this. We can provide an error boundary or an error element prop on our route. And so let's go that road with the error element prop and let's see what this looks like. And let me just quickly pull this up. Let's just search through the React Router docs and see what error element is. And they have a little bit of useful information here. When exceptions are thrown for various situations, including if the path, if the route is bad, the error path will be rendered, right? So there's like a special error path. And there's different ways that we can use this, and we'll get to that later. And this stuff is a bit more advanced, so we don't have to worry about it. But I think it's just good to see the docs and know that it's there. But let's go ahead and add this to our application. And the way that I do this is inside my main object that has all of like the routing around the app element, but not as one of its children. We can use this special property on the object that React router will look for, and we get a nice hint here, air element. And so now I want my air page component here, but this doesn't exist yet. So I'm going to comment this out, and let's go ahead and create it. And by the way, if you do start nesting like this with this child contacts page, you may want to put them in a components directory, depending on your structure. There is something nice about having each component here in pages being like a top level page. I think it just depends. If you do put them in pages, I do not recommend nesting directories inside of directories. I think that will just become too confusing, and you're better off with one pages directory with a lot of stuff in it. So let's make an air page, and I'm just going to copy this and paste it, and we're not using an outlet, and I'll rename this to error page. And I do recommend using guide code the way that I am here. To make your life easier. You do have to know what stuff you have to change, so I wouldn't want to do it for anything complex. But as your apps get bigger, it is really normal when doing software development professionally to like copy a good existing code that has a good pattern and modify it from your own code base. As always, the most important thing is understanding it. In some examples, you all may have seen something like this, where the return statement just has the element after it. So with the React component, if we're just returning one element, we can go ahead and write it like this. It's the exact same thing. And in fact, technically speaking, this is the clean, correct way to write it. Sort of for learning purposes, I've been writing it like this. There's also something to be said for consistency. This is the exact same thing as without the parentheses. And remember that all the fragments do is act as a placeholder. So this is the exact same as this. And I'll just leave it that way as an example so we can see it. And now let's go ahead and hook this up. And I do need to import my air page. And now I get a nice error message. So if I've got something bad in here, then voila, we get an error message. And if we go to the home page, it works. And as we saw earlier, in fact, it's like our biggest enemy is programmer error. So it's super easy. And I was doing this just a moment ago where I maybe screw up my link. And now that takes us to the error page, right? React Router tries to route to contact, but contact does not exist because the actual route we defined is contacts with an S. So React Router falls back to this default error page. What questions do folks have? Cool. Awesome. So folks, this actually covers pretty much everything we wanted to get into today. Tomorrow we'll learn how to do some more advanced React Router features for things like if I have maybe params in here, such as when we get to Rick and Morty, like this, and how to hook this up to React. We'll learn about something called context that sort of helps us dealing with if we need to pass stuff through as props to child components with React Router. But we'll get to there tomorrow. You absolutely can look ahead if you want, but this really covers everything we wanted to today. And I do see a question in Whiskey Questions. If we want to use Bootstrap for the navbar, would we use that in app.jsx or would it be better as a component? That's a great question. Let's talk a bit about project structure. So you're probably going to want to have a directory named components in addition to pages. And we can actually go ahead and build a bit of this out because we have a bit of time to dig into stuff. So let's make this a full width. Let's actually throw in a real Bootstrap navbar here. How does that sound to folks? Can I get a quick show of hands maybe to see like who would be interested in that? Okay, I'm seeing enough thumbs up that we're gonna do it. Awesome. So, and let me answer the question first before we dive into building and stuff. So the question is, if I've got a Bootstrap navbar, would I want to build the whole thing out here in the app, or would I want to put it in components? So, first off, just to reiterate, the advantage of putting something like a navbar that should exist on every page. And in fact, what we can do is let me. I was going to try and like add Flexbox stuff to make this all horizontal, but I'm not going to try and do that right now. That will be too much of a rabbit hole. Like we can pretend all this stuff is a navbar if we want, and we want it to be on every page, right? And let me in fact fix that contacts link so I don't have something broken in our demo code. And we want this on the app.jsx component because it will be there every time, right? And this is sort of our template for the rest of the app. Someone was asking about templating before, and we can see now how we can use React components to compose things together, right? We're not inheriting, it's not quite the same as classes, but we can compose to make pages and templates and things like that. So the short answer is, if there's not a lot of stuff here on the app component and we're only using the navbar in one spot, it might make sense to build it out like we have here. If we have a lot of stuff on the app component, just for readability, it might be useful to break it into a separate component. So when I'm looking at app, it's easier to read. That's kind of personal preference, to be honest. If for some reason we need to use that navbar in other components, whether that component is a quote unquote page or something else, then obviously we want it to be a separate component so we can use it in multiple places. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome, totally. And before I dive into building the Bootstrap navbar, what else is on people's minds in terms of questions around React Router or anything else that we've been covering? Okay, cool. Let's actually build a Bootstrap navbar. I think that'll be a blast. And can someone remind me, how do I install Bootstrap? Kara, yes, I saw a couple of hands pop up there.
You're gonna want to do I think it's bootstrap dash react or react dash bootstrap and then bootstrap.
Yeah, exactly. We need to install React Bootstrap, and I think we also need to install the Bootstrap npm package. React Bootstrap is what lets us write nice React components, and the Bootstrap package has the actual CSS. And now that I've installed it, and FYI, like when you install a new npm package, or whenever you change like anything in index.html or main.jsx, you might need to kill and restart your dev server because hot module reloading has its limits. What do I need to do next with Bootstrap? I remembered there was something that I have to do with the CSS somewhere so that we can use Bootstrap the right way. Does anyone remember what that is? Brian, yes, sir.
Yeah, don't you have to go into like main.css and import the Bootstrap resource there.
I think you're on the right path. Can you guide me to that, or should we pull it up in the curriculum?
Yeah, so yeah, if you find your mains, oh sorry, it's in your index.css. I'm sorry. Oh no, I'm sorry. It's your main.jsx. My bad. In your main.jsx, you do import Bootstrap.
Okay, and I like to put npm packages at the top of my imports. Import Bootstrap.
It's quotation marks. Bootstrap /dist/css /bootstrap.min.css.
Yep, the minified Bootstrap CSS. So it's minification is like if you look at CSS and it's easy to read, imagine a program that takes all like the long class names that are easy to read and turns it into like 2 letters and gets rid of all the spaces so that it takes the minimum amount of space, but then it becomes very difficult to read. And that's what minification is, both with CSS and JavaScript, so that there's less, the file size is less when it's sent over the internet. So import bootstrap dist css bootstrap.min.css from Bootstrap, I'm guessing.
Mine worked without anything after that but a semicolon.
Oh, I think you're right. My apologies. Because we're importing the CSS file the same way that here we just need to pass the file. Okay, cool. Let's go to App.jsx. Let's maybe add like a Bootstrap. Is it navbar? Does that sound right? Or can anyone remind me what the name of the Bootstrap nav component is?
It is navbar, but there should not be the B should be lowercase, I believe.
Thank you. So let's go ahead and do that, and let's do import navbar from Bootstrap. Let's see if this is working. Because now we have enough. Now we have enough to see if we get like any Bootstrap styles applied when we restart our dev server. And we ran into some sort of error.
On the Bootstrap page, it's from the import navbar. It's in quotates React Bootstrap /navbar.
Thank you so much. That is what I forgot about. Because when we do the default import, we need with Bootstrap, we're importing from each component is in its own file. Awesome. So let me just kill and restart my dev server. And let's see what happens. Okay, so this is promising. I feel like I'm seeing some Bootstrap CSS here. Let's do a sanity check and look at contact styles. And if I look at the styles here for this H1 and we scroll down a bit, I'm seeing an awful lot here that looks like Bootstrap. I see these Bootstrap breakpoints, and there's just like fonts and styling applied that weren't there before. So I think we've got that properly hooked up. And can anyone remind me, like, if I want to put these links in the nav bar, how would I do that with Bootstrap? And let's open up React Bootstrap as we're doing this. But I'd love someone to help walk me through some of this. Well, this is interesting, right? Because if I look at the Bootstrap docs, what I see here is in their basic example, and let's ignore like the container and the brand and all this stuff. I see that they've got an href. And I see that the nav bar has this nav.link that we can use. but that doesn't seem right because we know we need to use the React router link component. So what I really want, and I don't know exactly what it is I just want like a little sort of nav bar container thingy that I can stick my React router link component inside. I don't know if it's nav or something else. So let's see if we can't find it as we poke around through the navbar docs for just a minute. And then if we don't, let's go to probably a Google search to find some good guide code. So as I'm skimming through this, what I'm looking for, and if anyone knows it, please feel free to shout it out, is I just want an example of like a nice navbar container. And actually, if I'm looking at this, I kind of see this is actually kind of interesting if I look at this example, because I see we've got a navbar and they stick a whole form inside it. And the form has, it looks like username, and then they end the form, and then they have another form. So, and I'm seeing like rows and columns right here from Bootstrap Grid. And I see the suggestion about container as well. So based on this, what I'm seeing is maybe I can just like make a row with some columns in it using Bootstrap Grid and put my React Router link components inside there, since we can see that they stick this stuff in the navbar just fine and it looks the way that it wants to, and they have two different forms. And just like here, there are two different forms, I kind of want two different link components. So let's take that approach. And in fact, let's make it even simpler. And let's just stick the link components in there and see what this looks like. And maybe we'll end up using Bootstrap's container for sort of its nice gritty Flexbox stuff. Maybe we'll use Bootstrap Grid rows and columns, or maybe we won't need that at all. Let's find out. So this is actually a pretty good start, right? It's not perfect, but they're in a row and I can move around. Now I am interested in, let's use the Bootstrap row component, and I'm just going to import it before I start using it because I want to make sure it comes from the right spot. So let's do React Bootstrap / row. And we know that we're going to need column too. So let's import both of those and let's put this stuff inside a row. And it looks like, let's see what my error is here, because this looks like it's some sort of typo. Let's comment that out since we're not even using it yet. Okay, so that's a good start. It's in the row.
Is it called COL?
It is COL. Thank you so much. That would do it. So that's kind of like the worst kind of mistake to make, because that is a total assumption on my part, and there's not an immediate like error message that helps. The solution would be to go to find some guide code, right? Let's go ahead and make these columns and see how we're doing. And one more. And I'm going to format my document so it looks nice. And this is going great, right? Home, about, contacts. I think I do want some sort of Flexbox something. I really would like these to stretch across here, maybe more evenly. Does anyone know how I can do that with Bootstrap's grid, either with row or with the container? Well, let's go find out. Let's go to the docs. Let's look at the grid. So container fluid for width across 100% all viewports and devices. So that sounds like it might do the trick. I wonder too if we can do this with a row, if we can make like a fluid row. Let's look at the row components API spec to see if it gives us any options here to do that. I'm not seeing any. So let's try adding a container and see if it does it. And at this point, we'll have a nice nav bar, and this is a good stopping point anyway. And we can circle back to the discussion of, do we want this just hard-coded in App.jsx or in its own file? And also, hopefully what's useful to see is sort of my process here of like how I read through docs to kind of find what I want to solve the problem that I have. Right? I'm not just trying to like read the whole doc on something from top to bottom. It's like I have something specific I want to accomplish, and I'm going to get as far as I can writing code for it. But then if I get stuck, then I will start using the Bootstrap docs. And I do remember there was a way to, you know, for different sizes, I think it was, to specify how much of the grid a row should take up. So
maybe try expand large.
For the row or the container? Yeah, we were almost there. I might have to poke around this a bit more. I suspect if we made the nav bar actually has a lot of built-in behavior that we might be able to leverage. I suspect if we set like column sizes for each of these for the large settings, that might do it. But also I know I'll end up going down a bit of a rabbit hole. With the nav bar, it also kind of wants like the nav bar brand logo component in the left side here. And when you do that, it shifts everything else for the right. So that's the other piece to add. And in fact, that one we can do pretty quickly. Let's do this nav bar. Maybe let's see if this works with nav. Yeah, I'm not even going to worry about navbar brand because I'm not sure about the href. I see I saw this comment in there. I'm not sure if this is what people meant with expand equals large. Oh, and Kara, yes.
I was just gonna say for the navbar brand, like if you just wanted it to like have a text in it, you don't have to have an href in there.
So let's see what happens if we put the link to our homepage here in the pad. Yeah, so that works great. Great call. And that's where you want your homepage link anyway, right? Is sort of here in, you know, and we wouldn't call it home. In fact, we'd call it something like Rick and Morty, you know, characters or whatever the name of our site was. That's an awfully long one. So maybe we just call it like RM Encyclopedia. So now we have a nav bar, and we're almost we're just at noon, so I think now's a good time to take final questions and wrap up. At this point, to be honest, I really think it's dealer's choice and personal preference whether this goes in a separate component or not. This is the only thing here right now. If we started adding more stuff like a sidebar and a footer, at that point, my personal preference for readability might be to put this in a navbar component, right? And I would just literally copy this stuff into a navbar component and put it in the components directory. Some people prefer to see it all in one spot. So I think there's a little bit of personal preference involved. Would folks like to see me break this into a component just sort of for learning purposes? Okay, let's do it. So the golden rule of refactoring, which is what we're doing now, my code does what I want. I don't want to change its behavior. I want to change how my code is organized or like internally what's going on. When you refactor, figure out the order of steps to do to minimize how much stuff you break along the way. So, because I want my code to continue to run and work well for as long as I can. So first, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make a navbar component. And I'm going to name it something that's not the same name as the Bootstrap navbar so I don't get confused. So I'm just going to name it my navbar. So I'm a big fan of avoiding names that might conflict. And it's going to be an arrow function, and it's going to return stuff. And we're going to export it. So because I wrote this skeleton code first, nothing has broken. Everything still works. I'm going to copy all of this and put it in my navbar. And I don't need those fragments, so I'll get rid of those. And I'll do a little formatting. And now I'm going to grab, and in fact, I don't even need link here anymore, which is nice. I'm just going to copy all this stuff and paste it in because we're going to need a couple different things. I don't need outlet, but I do need link from React Router DOM, and then I need all these other things. And now I don't need any of those. I don't need that. And now, fingers crossed, my navbar. Right. And so the trick with refactoring is just to be careful and deliberate because it's really easy to make typos. This is where keyboard shortcuts are really your friend. I'm using this plugin called Vim that is sort of keyboard shortcuts on steroids that I don't recommend. Copying and pasting with the mouse and learning VS Code keyboard shortcuts, I do recommend. So again, dealer's choice, but if we had a lot in here, like if we had my sidebar and we had, like my footer, then there's something nice about I can look here and I can see the big picture. And if I need to look at the dirty details of the navbar or the sidebar or the footer, I can go to that component. But again, some people actually prefer to see it all in one spot. So there is a little bit of personal preference involved. But there is something nice where like all I have to do here is focus on the navbar. Awesome. So that was cool. We got to make a little progress and we threw some Bootstrap into the mix. What question? Let me actually I think we should wrap up because we are a bit past time. So thank you very much everyone for sticking around. Let me quickly walk through the assignments for this afternoon, and then I'll stop the recording and maybe tackle if there's one or two more questions. So for this afternoon, there is some more React reading, and I do recommend keeping up with this. The priority is continue building out Rick and Morty. Tomorrow, we will be doing more Rick and Morty. So I highly recommend prioritizing this today, where there should be an about page that has some general information about the show. A stretch goal, once you have everything else done, is maybe you use an API to get that information from the Rick and Morty API. The big feature here is routing and the characters page. The characters page should make an API call to the Rick and Morty API and use the Bootstrap card component to render all the characters as a card with the image and the information for the character. So you're going to need to use state, probably. You're definitely going to need to use effect, Axios, async await, and map. You probably will need to use state, but you're definitely going to need to use effect. You need to have routes for each of these pages. you should write a component named not found JSX. That's your error message. You should have that error root. In fact, we just started working on the navbar. So you want to make a navbar and add some styles and add some Cypress tests to do basic things. So there's a good amount of work here. Very clearly, the big feature here is the character page. So I would recommend get your skeleton working, get a home page, get an about page, get an empty character page, get the routing working for those, and then implement the character page with the features, because that's where the bulk of it is. The rest of this is important, but this is by far the most important bit. Do folks have any questions about the assignment for this afternoon? Okay. Awesome. Oh, can we use Tailwind instead? I think we want you to use Bootstrap cards specifically. If you want to use, I'm going to say probably yes. Let me double check with Francisco to get his thoughts. So let me get back to you on that, Natalie. Good question. Any other questions? All right. Awesome. Thank you very much, folks.